Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Social Hotelier podcast with me, Sam-Erik Ruttmann. Why is leadership hard as it is? We aim to get the answer to this question with my today's guest, Summer Jelinek. Now, Summer is a well-known speaker in the business world, and she's helping many of the businesses who are struggling to understand what it takes to be a good leader. There are tons of books written about this topic, and I'm sure there'll be another hundreds of thousands of books and articles written about the same topic. But I like to probe into an expert who has been really researching this in a very interesting way. Now, Summer has 20 years of hospitality experience. She worked in different jobs, ranging from the support areas in hotels to kitchens and even cake decorator, which I found very fascinating because I know that's a very fascinating skill to have. Talent coach in one of the best supermarkets in the United States, and leader with Walt Disney World and Disney Institute. So she's a keynote speaker on leadership and workshop trainer. She authored an Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. So welcome, Summer. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Great. So let's get started. I'm really curious how you got involved into hospitality. We all have this story what initiated that spark that we get started. So what is your story? How did you get started into hospitality, and which leads you to what you do today?
Yeah, it was an accident, honestly. I started working as a pizza delivery driver, and then they realized that I was good making pizzas, so I started making pizzas. And once I realized that I could cook and people would pay me to travel to cook, the entire world opened up. So I was 20, 21 years old and went to go work at a ski resort in lift operations in the northeast of the United States, and then went to go work at a dude ranch where people come out and play cowboy for a week in Colorado. Went back to college and decided that I really loved working with hospitality and loved you never know what's going to happen. Like, you show up and you have your day to day, but the guests always add this unknown quantity. And I really like taking those moments that the guest maybe wasn't having the best experience and turning those around, and brought that to Walt Disney World. So I spent almost 10 years with Walt Disney World and the Disney Institute. And then while I was there, Disney Institute put me on a stage, and that was where my speaking business began, was that moment.
Fantastic. Can you just explain for those who don't know, and particularly I don't know, with the Disney Institute, what is that all about?
Yeah, so Disney has, or the Walt Disney Company has two learning branches. You have Disney University, which is the internal, and it teaches Disney employees, also known as cast members, about the Disney culture. And then the Disney Institute is, say, an organization really wants to understand how Disney does leadership or how Disney does guest services. Then Disney Institute will partner with them. So they're the consulting side of Disney.
Okay, very good. When you go back looking at your career, because you have done so many things, and you will always think about, well, what is that memorable moment I have, why I still continue doing what I'm doing? What would that be if you look at, was it the cake decoration, or was it in the dude ranch, or what would it be?
It is a combination of all of the things. It's more about the leaders that I worked with. So it's growing up in a small town. I didn't have a lot of business acumen, definitely didn't have a lot of polish. And I found either leaders that would support me in my journey and see that hunger and be able to take my very sometimes intense focus and point it in a direction that benefited both them and the organization, or I would have leaders that really didn't know what to do with that. And so feeling the experience of having that leader that was all in and having that leader that was a little unsure, not really knowing what to do with such an intense personality, I became fascinated with how do we work with and through others. And so my realm has always been in hospitality, but the why I do what I do now is to help leaders be that first leader, the one that has the tools and the resources to help their employees thrive.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that. I mean, I also work for different leaders, and particularly the ones who took their time with me, and also to help me to kind of lifted me when I felt week, and I didn't know how to go about things. And I still remembered. And in fact, after all these years, I have a regular call with someone who brought me from Helsinki, Finland to Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And we just had a call 2 weeks ago. And it's like we haven't talked, we didn't speak for many, many years. But when we started to have this discussion, it's like it was like yesterday. It was an amazing feeling that you
Yes.
have. And I'm sure you have that also about who became your mentors and that you remember with fondness.
Absolutely. And I have a few that are the same way. I'll pick up the phone. It could be 6 months or a year,
Yeah.
and we pick it up and just completely take off, just like it was
Yeah.
yesterday. That relationship is so powerful.
Yeah. One thing I noticed, I went to your website and to take a look, which I always do. I'm kind of a little bit I'm curious about the person I'm going to have a discussion with. And in your business logo, you have a sentence that says, "It's not just business; it's personal." And it's actually a very popular sentence to be used. It's not personal; it's only business. But you turn it around.
Right.
So please speak about that and what it means to you and how that relates to what you're doing.
I think so many times we can get caught up in our policies and procedures or what's happening that we forget about the human in front of us that is relying on us, whether that is a guest or whether that is an employee. And we use the "it's just business" as a scapegoat, and we should never forget the human aspect, the fact that we're dealing with people. And that's the one thing that when I see leaders that excel versus leaders that struggle, it's those that don't understand how to find that balance with, yes, I'm here for the organization, but I also need to take care of people. And so everything that I do in my business is remembering person first. And that's my logo. And it helps remind me when I get caught up and I'm dealing with multiple contracts and all of these things. And I have one client who wants this and one client who wants this. And I'm like, can we just, it helps remember that they are doing the best that they can in their situation. And my job is to help make that easier, not harder.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I was in about a month ago, a couple of months ago. I went to Berlin attending a conference. There was a panel discussion, and in these panel discussions, we had a CEO of a company. It was an architect and someone else who was into development, and everyone kind of spoke what is important to them. And what struck me, one of the CEO actually said that for him, the employees comes first for him.
Mhm.
That's what he talked about, and then it kind of raised some eyebrows, and some people said, "Well, what do you mean? It's should be the customer comes first." And no, he says, "Well, the employee comes first." And how do you feel the same way about the attitude that the successful leaders look at that as the starting point in some way how they are dealing in to make their business successful? That the employee actually comes first because they are the ones who has to deliver.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm working with frontline managers, especially, I always tell them, like, your employees are your customers, they're your guests. The guests are your employees. So when we show our team how to treat our guest by treating them the same way we would want to treat our guest, it tends to make things a lot easier. And that can get tricky because you have accountability conversations, but we've had to have accountability conversations with customers as well. Like we all know those customers that have come in that have had to better understand what we're trying to do. And so it's treating our team with the same respect and the same, to some extent, deference that we do with our customers. And by doing that, it allows our team to know exactly what to do in difficult situations, in good situations. And if we're wanting them to represent our organization and us as leaders when we're not there, then let's give them something that they're proud to represent.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that we agree we're going to talk about is actually the starting point. Why is leadership as hard as it is? How can you speak about that? Because I think that's always we talk about it's very hard, and for some people it comes easier to them.
It does. And I remember being on the kindergarten playground as a 5-year-old, and I was what you would call a bully on the playground. And even at such an early age, there were just some kids that naturally got it. And so you can see this distinction from kids all the way to adults. But I had a professor when I was going to school for my MBA, and we were talking about emotional intelligence. And she said something I'll never forget. She said, emotional intelligence is something that can be learned. Many of us are blessed with different gifts. This is not a gift, it is a skill. And so when we think about leadership, leadership should never be easy because you are dealing with people's careers and people's lives, but it also doesn't have to be as complicated as we make it. So when leaders have the tools and the resources to do the work on themselves first, I call it managing yourself first. When they have the tools and the resources to manage themselves first, get the ego out of the way, then leadership gets a lot less complicated. The right thing tends to show up. Now, the right thing isn't always easy, but it tends to show up more clearly.
Yeah. How important is language? How when you're speaking with either your customers or your employees as a leader, I'm kind of getting into that. There are certain leaders that want to stand behind kind of a corporate lingo, and they want to have some cliches that they're using, and it usually has, at least it turns me off right off the bat, because it's not the human contact that. How do you go about talking about that with your in your work, for instance?
One of the first things that I do is tell them they're not allowed to say corporate said, this is the policy, anything like that. Because in no circumstance ever has that phrase made something better. It's the equivalent of somebody being really angry and saying, I'm going to need you to calm down.
Yeah.
Same thing. That has never worked. And so language is really important, and being intentional about why you're there. If you're just trying to escape the conversation, that's when those scapegoats phrases come into play. When you're actually there, you're invested, you're trying to solve the problem, you're there for the person in front of you, remembering it's personal, not just business, then we don't rely so much on that. We're more willing to take the time to explain the why. This may be a policy, but why is it a policy? Why is it important? And I can remember when I worked at Disney, they had something that caused a lot of frustration for us, in that the Disney stores outside of Walt Disney World, the Disney store was actually a separate company within the Walt Disney Company. And so somebody would purchase something at the Disney store, and the employees would say, well, you can just return it at the parks when you go. Because we were two completely different companies, we couldn't do that. And so I could just say, oh, policy states we can't do this, or explain, this is the Disney store is a separate company. It would be like trying to exchange something from Target to Walmart. Yes, they seem very similar, but they're separate within the Walt Disney Company. And many times just that explanation, people were like, oh, and then following it up with, we can't do that, but here's what we can do.
Yes.
So not only saying no, we can't always say yes, but we don't always have to say no either.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure does. Sure does. Yeah. I mean, there are so many examples. When I stay in hotels, and I recently stayed in a hotel, and somehow I realized that I learned from dealing with the employees or who was working there, what kind of the leader they're working for. And in one of the hotels, there was always saying that, well, it's the policy of the hotel that you cannot check in before 3 p.m. I said, well, do you have any clean rooms? No, but the policy is. So we were going about that, and I realized that, okay, now I understand this hotel a little bit better now, and I'm not sure if I want to stay another time, because now there's a policy issue for me too.
What's the difference between getting in a clean room at 2 versus getting in a clean room at 3? It's the same room. Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. That's infuriating.
Yeah. Things have changed. I mean, I'm coming from the analog era, working in hospitality, and I started very, very young. But what changes have you seen in the frontline industries like hospitality, and with the workplace changing so fast, and what impact do the employees have on this change? I mean, how are they as motivated as we are? I used to consider myself, and I stay in the same job for my entire working life.
Yeah, it's very different. I was speaking with a colleague. She's a futurist, a certified futurist. And so her responsibility is to look and see patterns that are coming and predict the future of the business world. And when I was talking to Crystal Washington, she stated we're in the midst of a Renaissance era. And I thought that was really interesting because when you look at the workplace, we are completely recreating the workplace. We have conversations of in person, hybrid, virtual. How do I lead all three? Then we're looking at hospitality, which in 2020, hospitality across the world just imploded. It stopped being. And what happened in this was you had your hardcore hospitality people that have been doing it for 20 years. They were forced to leave the industry and then they found another job and they're like, oh, you mean I can have dinner with my family? I can have holidays off? What is this new world? And they didn't come back. And so there was a big trust that was broken through no fault of any leaders, but there was a big trust that was broken with that the industry wasn't there for them as it had been. And so we have this influx of many times younger individuals coming into hospitality, as we always have. But one thing that's unique about this generation is they are no longer willing to be in toxic relationships with their workplace. And I think that's really important for leaders to hear. It's no longer that, you're going to put in 60 hours because, oh, that's what I did. No, they were not going to do that. So then can we look at our workforce? Can we look at our scheduling? What ways can we get creative to solve for the issues that, quite frankly, aren't going away? Then we add in AI. This could be a whole episode in itself of the changes. But the one thing that I would caution, there's a lot of conversation about the new generation coming up. As a millennial, I'm very happy they're not talking about us anymore. But when we think about generational research, no matter the generation, we say the exact same thing every time a new generation comes up. And I have caught myself saying the same things like, where's the work ethic and all of these things. The generations don't change. How we show up may change, but they still want to work. They still want to come into work and have a good time. They're idealistic. They do believe that there is a better way. And this generation is different in that they will tell you what the better way is. And so listen to what your team is telling you. You may not be able to take every piece of advice that they're giving, but there are some nuggets that they are throwing out that if leaders are listening, they'll be able to make the changes less painfully than what they are currently doing right now, which is kicking and screaming and fighting every step of the way.
So what does it require from a leader now? I mean, who comes from a different generation, and then you have, obviously come from a different generation, then you have these young who just came into the industry and have it all figured out in their mind, but they don't have an experience. How are we going to deal with them so they don't get frustrated and say that I'm not going to put up with this old guy and I'm taking a hike, I'm leaving somewhere else? How can we deal with those situations?
What I have been doing is I've been talking to my mentors and asking them, how did you deal with me? When I was 20, I was 25, I was 30, I was making all of these decisions that to me were the best decisions in the world. And my leaders were like, could just slow down just a little bit. So rely on your mentors. Right now, as leaders, when we're in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, ask the people that came before us, what did you do? How did you manage this? Because again, it hasn't changed. It's just we are now in the grown-up shoes versus just coming into the business world. And then understand that you're going to have to teach your employees, especially your younger employees that are just coming in, you're going to have to teach your employees certain skills that to you seem like common sense. I remember working with a college programmer at Disney and I was like, hey, I need you to sweep the restaurant. And poor kid, he was trying, but you could tell he had never swept. And so I could walk up and be like, are you kidding? Like you've never had a broom? Or I could walk up and say, hey, let me show you a quicker way to do that. And there was no judgment. It was just a quick teach. And in that moment, instead of being shamed, because obviously he thought he was going to be shamed because he didn't ask, instead of being shamed, he was met with compassion and education. So this is where that it's not just business, it's personal. You have to meet the individual where they are, whether you think they should be further along or not. So meet them with compassion and don't, as one of my old leaders said, don't assume anything. Because when you start assuming, that's where the big gaps happen. And that's, as a leader, you can get frustrated with the expectation versus the reality. Disappointment lies right here. So
Sure.
Don't make assumptions. Meet them where they're at.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about that. You have a sort of a perception, which means that you have from your own point of view how things should be, but then you actually should turn around and think about the perspective of the other person, and that if you can get into their shoes for the moment and then understand where they're coming from, I think that will close the gap, isn't it?
It absolutely. That's where conversations happen. And that's what you're wanting as a leader. No matter the conversation, you're wanting it to stay a two-way conversation,
Yeah.
not just talking at, but talking with somebody.
Yeah. I just read about these different personality types, and I was just kind of curious that could you speak about your experience in recognizing how certain personality types excel in leaderships? Are certain personality types more suitable for leadership, or what is your take on this? I looked at all these ESFP and performance coordinators, humanitarians, etc. What's your thought on
Mhm.
this?
This is the most common question that I get asked when I'm talking to leaders. Everybody wants to know what is the right way.
Yeah,
And there is no single right way. It depends on the situation, it depends on the industry. What works really well in hospitality leadership is not going to work in most cases in accounting leadership. What works really well in hospital leadership is not going to work really well in school leadership. There are pieces that we can pull. So, making it personal, meeting the individual where they're at, being able to have difficult conversations and not avoid them. But that one specific personality style, there is no one right way to lead. Because if I have a team of 60, I'm essentially 60 different leaders for individuals. Now, I'm staying authentic to who I am. I'm not trying to be somebody I'm not. But when you're meeting somebody, it's like if you have 3 kids, you're going to shift your parenting style based on the kid in front of you because you understand that they have different needs and different motivations. It's the same thing in leadership. So I would love to say, this is it. This is the one right way to lead. And if I were to guess, I would say it was INTJ because that's what I am. But I know better. There is no one right way. It depends on the industry and the people that you're trying to lead.
well, that's very good because I think many people will be relieved when they hear this, so they don't have to jump in, try to find the kind of change their own style in order to fit into the business and so on. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the future and what it takes to lead beyond tomorrow. What is how should we think about that now? Because today is today and tomorrow is a new day, and we have to really think about how we're going to manage our life and our leadership skills beyond tomorrow.
You have been doing your research, sir. Well done. That is a brand new keynote that I have just introduced, the Leading Beyond Tomorrow. When we think about beyond tomorrow, it's really breaking it up into 3 steps, 2 steps for some industries, but 3 steps generally. So the first step is redefining work. Work no longer looks like what it did when you and I were a kid. As you mentioned, when I started, it was analog as well. It wasn't long before computers came in, but it's understanding that work is no longer Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. It takes place at the office. Everybody has to be in. The way that you get ahead is be the first one in and the last one out, taking on all of the projects. We, as a industry, we are looking in at high burnout levels. And as I mentioned earlier, our employees, including our leaders, are no longer willing to take the toxic behaviors from organizations. So organizations are really having to understand, what does work look like? Shake Shack recently introduced 4-day work weeks for their leadership team, and it's doing extraordinarily well. So just because we've always done it doesn't mean that we have to keep doing it. We're really looking at what is truly working and what isn't, but maybe we just don't have the time and the money and the focus to be able to get rid of it, and what is just turning our employees into a churn where they're coming in and coming out. The next piece is looking at the in-person, virtual, and hybrid workspace. How you lead in those environments. It is different to lead in person, it is different to lead virtual, and it is different to lead hybrid. We don't have one style that works for all three. So really understanding, as a leader, what is required of you, what does your environment look like, and then being willing to rethink some of the things that we learned in the office, especially if you're in that virtual or hybrid space. And then finally, looking at technology. So right now, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. There's a lot of people that are super interested, maybe a little hesitant. For those that are hesitant, understanding we have been using AI. If you have spoken to any smart device, then you have used an AI. So it is not anything new. It's just become a much broader tool set that we have available to us. And I heard a speaker a long time ago, and they said that AI isn't going to replace humans. AI will replace humans that aren't using AI. So when we're thinking about it, finding that partnership, finding the tools and the resources that work well for you. And those are the first three steps into looking beyond tomorrow, how to thrive in the workplace of the future. They will not be the last three steps, but they're the first, they're a good starting point.
Very good. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's actually fascinating now how you have to actually have a different leadership skills when you deal with hybrid. I think that it's all, in one way, it started with when we have this epidemic of COVID a couple of years ago, and you cannot try to super control your employees at what time they come to work, and because you are not able to, they're not going to punch in a time card anymore. It's a different way of thinking, so you have to really think about those things. And um, I mean, I work at the moment with an architectural firm, even though I'm from hospitality. It's a multi-generational, and I'm the oldest guy there, and then the rest is in the 40s, and then some in the 30s. And during that time, we had a really good understanding what kind of work we need to do when we couldn't come to the office, and it actually worked very well. But I think, at the end of the day, it still means we still want to meet face to face and having those face to face meetings, because there's that nuances about the tone and the facial expressions which makes a world of a difference, that you can understand. There's many signals that go through that you have to you evaluate in your mind, which you cannot when you in a hybrid situation. So obviously that leadership skill that you need to have when you deal with people on hybrid, it must be very different.
It is, yeah. And when we think about just trying to do in person versus virtual, those require two skills. And then hybrid, I think, is the hardest out of all three of them.
Yeah.
When you have some individuals that are in the workforce, some individuals that are virtual, and you're trying to build a team in both of those worlds. So when we're going through it and thinking about it, one of the things that it wasn't shocking. It was shocking, and I can't believe they did that. Not in they actually did that. When COVID happened and everybody went home, there was this uptick in software. It was a massive uptick in software that was sold that tracked employees' keystrokes and mouse clicks and when they were on the computer, when they were off the computer. Thankfully, a lot of organizations realize that's not where we want to go, because tell me you don't trust your employees without telling me you don't trust your employees.
Yeah.
It's how can we look at the results? What results are we trying to get? So I think about coding. If you have a bunch of coders, they may be more comfortable being online in a hybrid or virtual space than they are in person. They may be able to actually show their personality more in the hybrid or virtual space. Whereas we think about hospitality, you're going to have a lot more extroverted personalities that are going to thrive on that in-person interaction. So as a leader, it's really asking yourself, what does my team need? Do I already have a cohesive team that manages themselves? If there's conflict, they're able to deal with conflicts without bringing me in. If so, maybe what we have is working. Just because it doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean that it doesn't work. So really starting with where your team is and figuring out what those shortcuts are. And then if you're not sure what to do, there are so many resources to assist leaders as they're going through this journey to be able to figure out, okay, let me try some new things. And it feels a lot like going back to the beginning of leadership and just restarting. And so many of us are uncomfortable with that because we put in our dues. We don't want to have to do that again. But if we want to stay in the world of leadership, that's kind of, you got to start back to the basics in a lot of areas.
Oh, very good. Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. So, whenever I have a guest on this show, I always talk about, I always tell them how much I love technology. I mean, that's not really true. I don't love everything about technology, but I like to keep up with the new demands of travelers and to keep up with the latest and greatest. There's always something that comes up that I'm curious to learn about. But also in the hotels, there has been a lot of changes, particularly during the COVID period when you had the self check-in, you had the digital concierges and the keyless entries. And so I'm just curious about your view on automation in hotels as you're coming from hospitality. So I like to ask that question. Do you think this is the way of the future, or like less human contact, or are you comfortable with all those kind of situations where you're not actually facing an employee any longer when you're in a hotel, that you actually could book a room, you go to the hotel and you never see anyone and you just pay your bill online?
I like pieces of it. And this is where, again, it comes down to what the individual, excuse me, 1 second. It is allergy season in Texas. So it comes down to what the individual is wanting and needing. I know some individuals that I travel with, they do everything digitally. They do not want to speak to anybody. So if they don't have to talk to anybody, they love it. Me, once I get on, if it's not a bot, if it's an actual person that I'm sending text back and forth, I'm asking for firm pillows and all of these things, trying to, because generally if I'm there for more than a couple of days. And there are certain things that I like that make it feel like home.
Yeah.
And then I like going up because, just like you said, you get a feel for how a hotel is run when you're having conversations with people. And so I like to go in and have conversations and see if I can get a feel for what's going on with the hotel staff. Some of my colleagues have no interest in that whatsoever, and some want it even more than what I do.
Yeah.
So I think the hospitality organizations that are excelling in this are the ones that have straight nobody, you don't see or talk to anybody. You have those in the middle that can make requests or do whatever, talk to a real person and not a bot. And then those that are on the other side that want everything to happen in person. And that's where, again, it comes back to it's personal. So there is no one right way. And the bigger the organization, the more resources that they need for their customers within reason. So that's one of the things that I appreciate about organizations that have three. They have, you can talk to somebody all day long, you can talk to them or go hands off, or you can go hands off. But when you start adding all the bells and whistles and you get like 10 or 15 options, then it gets overwhelming. So trying to figure out, what do your clients actually want? What is it that they're wanting from you? Have conversations, do the research. Don't assume that you know what your guests, customers, and clients want from you.
Yeah.
Let them tell you what they're wanting.
Very good. Good. Excellent discussion, Summer. So I have two more questions for you before we wrap up. And one question I always like to ask my guests, besides what we have talked about, what are some other trends that you see happening in hospitality that hoteliers should take note of? And obviously that trend doesn't have to be from hospitality, from any kind of business. Your thoughts on that?
Our customers have changed and our employees have changed. I think the biggest trend is the younger generation that is coming in currently, Gen Z, is very open about talking about their emotions and where they're at and taking mental health days. And what this has done, which is really interesting, is it's giving the older generations permission to do the same. And so there's a lot more talk about how people are feeling in the workplace. And if we're not comfortable with that, then doing a little bit of work within ourselves to figure out why we're not comfortable with that. Like if somebody comes up and starts crying, I have no idea what to do with that. Completely stresses me out. But I now have tools in my toolbox to be able to handle that for them. And so understand that emotions are not going away. They are going to be a bigger conversation. Customers are getting more comfortable in sharing their emotions with you as well. It is no longer just anger or extreme happiness. There's some stuff in between. So get comfortable with emotions when people are describing the difference between irritation, frustration, and anger. What does that mean for you? How are you going to respond differently? And helping your team get comfortable not only with their emotions, but with other people's emotions as well. Because I feel like hospitality and healthcare are the two that deal the most with people being very emotionally upfront. So that is not going away. And then the other piece is, when we're working with our teams, look at the results. Don't look at the process. understand what it is that you're wanting, and then get out of your team's way. With so much conversation happening around neurodivergence and the way that different people think and the way that processes look differently, leaders can do themselves a phenomenal service by giving the results, being very clear as the results that they want, and then backing out of the process, because then they get time back too. So instead of fighting against it, utilize that time. How can I be more strategic? How can I start thinking at that next level? How can I be more helpful to my leaders if I'm trying to grow within the company? So those are two of the biggest pieces. The people are what's changing the most. Technology is assisting that change, but the people are what's changing the most.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. Well, my final question is that not if, but when people are interested to find more about your coaching services, workshops and public speaking. So how can they reach you, and where can they find you?
So they can go to summerjelinek.com. Summer is just like the season. Jelinek is JELINEK.com. And then I just published my book, Unlocking the Magic of Leadership. If they are interested in getting the first section, so it's all about manage yourself first. It's the first 3 chapters of the book. They can go to unlockingthemagicofleadership.com/MYF. So manage yourself first, MYF. They will put in their email and then get the first 3 chapters of the book. So that's a good way to stay in touch as well.
Very good. And also a tip that each letter in the word magic has a meaning to it, right?
It does, yes.
Okay, so, that's a hint. We will not reveal what it is, but so they have to do something about it.
Yes, if you go to my website, you will see all of them. If you like puzzles, there's definitely a fun puzzle, a pixie dusted puzzle, if you will.
Very good. Thank you very much, Summer. I really appreciate that you have joined today. I always enjoy speaking with someone like you because I learn in the process, and it was a very interesting exchange we have today. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Sam-Erik. It was my pleasure being here.